Hello, my sunshines, and welcome back to another episode of the Creating Sunshine podcast. Today, I'm joined by Kaytlyn, and this interview has been a long time coming because, life gets busy and we're trying to connect. But I think that the good thing and what I love, and especially considering the work that you do, is not just trying to jam it in because, like we said, we were going to do it, right? But actually going, you know what? I need some space. I need some time. Let's do it when it feels more aligned for us. And I love that. And I think that's just such a great reminder to other people. Like maybe you've committed to something and then you're like, you know what, this isn't going to work for me right now. Like it's okay to say like, let's wait. So I just like thought about that as we were hitting record because I feel like we had originally talked about this like months ago. So
Yeah,
finally, welcome to the show.
thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so excited. You're right. It's been a long time coming.
It has. And I came across so Kaytlyn has her own podcast. I love it. And it's called Not So Dumb Blonde. So of course it caught my attention because like I told her before we hit record, I'm gray now, but I was blonde. My daughters are blonde. So when I saw it, it was like super I thought it was a super catchy title. And
I love
I
it.
also feel like it's super deceiving because what you do, because you are definitely like you're very smart
Thank you.
in your work and everything. But I would love to know, like, what made you come up with that name for your podcast? And like, what was the story behind you starting your own podcast?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I love answering this. It's so funny. People don't ask me that. So
Oh, no.
I'm very excited. So growing up, that was one thing. When you're in high school, people are like kind of mean. And even throughout college, I think when you grow up, you get a little bit older into adulthood, this falls off a little bit more. But I just always felt like this extreme need to prove myself because of the color of my hair. And it's insane. It shouldn't be like that. But I just remember feeling like I had to go the extra mile. And to be honest, I was bullied pretty hard when I was in high school and in middle school. And I would always hear it would come back somehow to being about my hair color. And so it just really affected me. And it was a major part of my identity. So, how I originally started this podcast was actually with one of my girlfriends. It used to be the Not So Dumb Blondes plural podcast. Her name was Lauren. She was blonde and she had the same experience. We were both, 5'10", 5'11", blonde, and we just had the same experience. And we're like, we should start a podcast. And she went on to do her own thing. She started a family with her husband and she's doing awesome things. And I just wanted to continue the podcast and keep it going, even though now it's taken a little bit of a different turn. But really, that is how it started, was just wanting to break those stereotypes that I feel like so many women are having to face.
It is true now that you mention that because and every time I remember, like, I would. I'm a really like say what's on my mind type of person, and
Same.
sometimes it might not be the smartest thing that comes out of my mouth. And how many times people would blame it on my hair. They'd be like, "Oh, that's the blonde. That's the blonde." And I never realized that right now until you said it. But yeah, people, and even now people that knew me from the past, like they'll still reference it even though I'm gray now. They're like, "Oh, you're a blonde at heart." Like,
Yep. And even though it seems like super light and playful and I would play it off, it starts to erode. It started to erode at my sense of self and my identity. And after a while, I just started to kind of believe it too because I was going along with it. And then I noticed myself kind of like filling this part. And
mhm.
one day I was just like, wait, it's actually funny. I've never talked about this before, especially on a podcast, but I dyed my hair black for like just to see.
Mhm.
And the way I was treated was so different. I was
Really?
complimented for how smart I was. I was complimented for my eyes. And then when I was blonde, things changed. And so I did like my own little social experiment. Now I don't care. I'm naturally blonde, so I stick with it. But it is funny how that is something so tiny when it happens on a regular basis can actually become problematic later on.
That's super interesting. Well, so, but now, in addition to having the podcast, I mean, you help women in so many ways. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about that and about your work and what you do. And like, what was the moment, or if there even was a moment, or it was a culmination of moments probably in your own life, or maybe you were working with someone and you're like, oh my God. Like, we're going to talk a lot today about feelings, about identities, about, how people process things in their life. But was there a moment that you were like, I think we've been taught to handle our feelings completely wrong, and I need to help people with this?
Resounding, yes. But it wasn't just like a one moment. I'll be honest, it started when I was a child. I have journals that I used to write where I was like, one day I'm going to help people like me who need help because I really had a pretty traumatic and turbulent upbringing. And so it started then. And I kind of lost sight of that a little bit throughout my years of college. And I went off to Spain. I got a master's degree in international relations. I had fun with that. It's always kind of been about like humanitarian aid and advocacy work. And it wasn't until my divorce that I was like, this is what I need to do. It's actually part of what prompted that process and me being authentic with myself, stepping into my full self. And what I realized was in me stepping into my full authentic self and pursuing the passion of what I wanted to do, it didn't fit the current marriage and the relationship that I was in. So it required me to shed that part of my life. But I think the aha moment for actually taking the leap was that. But the aha moment for, okay, things need to change. I just had repetitive patterns throughout my early adulthood in my 20s, and my relationships were not working. And I'll be honest, they were very unhealthy relationship patterns, and I was so confused why the same pattern was happening over and over again. And I was becoming more and more aware of my upbringing and, my experiences with that. And I just remember I met a man and he told me, he was the first person that ever told me this. And it was my aha moment. He said, I don't know if you know this, but the way that you handle conflict and the way that your family handles conflict is not healthy and it's not normal. And I love you, but it's not normal. And I don't think it's your fault, but
Uh-huh.
someone needs to tell you. And I trusted him enough and I listened to him. And that's what prompted my journey. I think I was 24 years old.
Mhm. That's so interesting, right? And up until that point, you're like, I think there's so many things that you touch on that when we're brought up that way and that's our life and that's all we know,
Yeah.
we do kind of think that it's normal because we don't know any other way
How do you
until
know?
you start to meet someone or you see something different and you're like, oh, wait,
Yeah.
huh,
Yeah.
maybe the way that things were happening in my upbringing weren't necessarily the best.
Right. And with that, I will say comes a lot of grief. A lot of the people that I work with and a lot of people that reach out to me experience this extreme amount of grief when they hit that aha moment because some of that requires setting boundaries with family members, friends, losing family members or friends sometimes, unfortunately. And with healing, it's not for the weak. Like it's really hard.
Yeah.
But it does take that, and it takes it from someone that you trust, right? It can't
Yeah.
just be anyone, but I think we all individually have our own little aha moments, and I always say it really happens when you're fed up with your own crap. Like when you're really sick of yourself and you're just like, I'm annoyed with my own self at this point, right? Because we are the only people that are going to choose when we actually want to heal. And so that was just kind of my moment. I was like, I can't blame this on anyone outside of myself at this point because I'm the common denominator. And
Oh my gosh. I say that all the time. I tell people, I'm like, when I started my personal development journey, probably in 2020, I said my husband and I separated in 2019. So, kind of like you, it catapulted me into this like, literally, I was sick of my own shit. I was like, I
yep,
am so sick and tired of feeling this way, of not showing up the way I want to show up, of not being the kind of mom that I want to be, all these things. And yeah, literally, it was a line in the sand. I was like, I'm fucking sick of this. Like,
I'm
what am I
done.
going to do about it? And so, I jumped head into personal development and was like, same thing. I'm like, no one is going to come and save me and no one's going to come and do this for me. Like, I have to. And I found podcasts and I started, journaling and doing all these things. And I was like, yeah, because I have to freaking change it. I can't blame anybody else for the things that have happened in my life anymore. Like, I have to just take accountability and freaking figure it out. So
Yes.
I really, really resonate with what you said on that.
Uh, yes. I'm glad.
I had a feeling. I had a feeling. I didn't know it was gonna be and this is what the best part I love about this is when you go to interview somebody and you kind of know, like, on a general level, and then people start talking and you're like, "Oh my gosh, now I realize why we were drawn to each other
I
because
get
we have
you.
a lot
I
of
get you, girl. Yeah,
similarities." I love
exactly.
that.
Exactly.
Well, and so for the women that come to you and the people that work with you, I think a lot of people have that like something maybe they are in relationships that aren't working or friendships that aren't working or a job that's not working. And then, like you said, it's the same patterns over and over again. And so somebody that's kind of having that feeling of like something's wrong with me, because they've been told, my daughter and I just talked about this morning on the way to school, saying like that you're too much and, you're too emotional, you're too broken, you're too all of this stuff, right? And when her and I were talking, my oldest is 12 And I told her, I said, you're not going to be for everyone. I'm not for everyone. And once you realize like that's okay. So maybe for someone you are too much. Maybe for someone you are too emotional, but that doesn't mean that it's like you're too emotional for like life. It's just maybe it's just for that person. And she's like, "Oh, mommy, that's so wise." And I told her, I said, "But it took me a long time to realize that. A long
Mm.
time to realize that." So for the woman that comes to you and they're sort of feeling that way, like how did we start to let that go?
It's so common, and it's definitely something that I used to struggle with a lot too, and obviously I'm not perfect. We are women in our society. So, it doesn't always fully just go away, but what does get better is the acceptance piece of it, and I really love what you said. The part about not being for everyone is important. And when my life really changed, and this comes throughout some training and some different therapeutic models as well, but also just like these moments that clicked is when I started owning who I was and owning the things that I thought were so shameful, like being too much or being too sensitive. Anybody who resonates with being a highly sensitive person will resonate with this feeling of feeling like they are too much. But the moment you just start owning it, and what I love and what cur- I found now with such a wonderful group of friends that I have is we talk about it. Like my friends will be like, well, I know sometimes I'm super sensitive. I'm just a sensitive girl. So I'm just going to ask you, am I overthinking? Are you mad at me? And there's no shame in it. It's like,
Yeah.
this is who I am. And the wrong people will fall off. And let me tell you, the benefit is like you're meeting people that fully align with you, the ones that stay, and you begin to empower each other more and more through these interactions of being authentic. And I really do believe it's kind of that butterfly effect, right? When you choose to be authentic in your true self and say maybe some things that you maybe used to tuck away, but you just kind of own it like, yeah, that's who I am. You're giving someone else the inspiration to also do the same. And you're attracting the people that are going to actually be better for you long term. But
Hmm.
I do want to touch on another point to actually give like tangible ways that were really helpful for me. So the healing process is not short. I mean, for me, it never ends. Like it is a process. It's not a destination. I tried all sorts of things in my 20s. I did hypnotherapy. I did EMDR. I was journaling. I was like going to yoga. I did everything. But when it really clicked for me is when I did dialectical behavioral therapy. And I had steered away from it for a little bit just because of the stigma around it with borderline personality disorder. But what I realized was that it's not just for people with borderline personality disorder. It really helps in a very structured way. And so anyone who feels like maybe they need more structure, like me, DBT is perfect for that because it's not just typical talk therapy where you're talking about your feelings. You're actually like going through and doing structured classwork and doing exercises to learn how to retrain your brain to process certain thoughts. So, like a perfect example for your daughter, like feeling too sensitive or too much in a particular situation. Dialectical behavioral therapy teaches us to walk that middle path and think in dialectics and not think in that black and white behavior. So the black and white thinking was, well, I'm just going to be too much for everyone. I don't fit into society, right? But
Hmm.
then there's the other side of it, which is just completely denying all of it. But there's this middle path of being like exactly what you said, which was great advice. You may be too much for some people, and you are not going to be too much for other people. So, not thinking in extremes and training my brain to start doing that on a regular basis was so helpful.
I like that. Okay, interesting. Good to know. And it's funny, especially now being a mom of girls. My girls are 12 and 8, and so much of this comes up. And to my 12-year-old, she's like tells me, "Mom, you give the best advice." But I tell her, I'm like, I want you guys to learn this stuff at a much younger age. Like I was literally 40 when I started doing this work. And not to say that before, I mean, I had a positive outlook, I had everything, but I think what started happening as I got older, and especially as things kind of started to fall apart in my marriage and things like that, is like, and I didn't really have super close people to me during that time. And you start to just kind of put that mask on, right? And to tell everybody else that you're fine, because then you have this weird, like, sense of maybe guilt or shame or feeling like, damn, my life is falling apart. And you're embarrassed as to what's happening. And I think that what we talked about before we hit record is that a lot of people, like, I would always see people that had it worse than me. is like, okay, but, you know, I wasn't in a physically abusive marriage, so
Mm.
I'm looking at it as to what's happening to me is maybe not that big of a deal versus what could be happening to somebody else. And I think that this starts to bring us into talking about trauma.
Mm.
And before we hit record, we talked about this a little bit. But I think when people hear the word trauma in their life, they think it has to be something like that, something really big, something dramatic, some type of like physical abuse or sexual assault or whatever. So we tend to downplay the things that have happened in our life because we feel, oh, well, someone else has had it so much worse than me. So maybe what's happened to me isn't that big of a deal. But I think that, you talk about it, how it shows up in every day in women's lives, and sometimes that we don't even notice. So, what does it actually look like for us to, now I'm able to acknowledge and be like, okay, I understand that somebody could have something so much worse happening to them, but that doesn't discount the things that have happened to me. And you have to accept that in order to start your healing in that area of your life.
Mhm. Yeah, I think what you're explaining is it's called self-monitoring, where we are constantly monitoring our behaviors, what we're saying, how we're coming across to other people, which is a trauma response. And so, one thing that I think a lot of people overlook, like you said, this idea of, I mean, we call it like T trauma, little t trauma.
Hmm.
When you have constant little t trauma over a long period of time, that's chronic. That's chronic nervous system dysregulation that changes your window of tolerance and what you're able to handle on a day to day basis. So it's going to look different for you than for other people. As far as what it looks like on the outside, I think that this is really hard because I think as humans, we do tend to make comparisons. I think it's a very normal human response. But keeping in mind that we don't know how one thing affects one person versus another. Like for some people, a very traumatic event, they may explain that to someone else who's like, that was just like a typical Tuesday for me growing up,
Right.
right? And that's really common. But what matters is how you are feeling. It doesn't
Hmm.
matter what anybody else is experiencing because you are living your life and your reality. You're not living theirs. And so I think that that is just a really important thing to keep in mind. And especially as women, is that we are constantly comparing ourselves. We are constantly trying to make sure that we are not disrupting the peace. We're just the fact that we're over analyzing, well, they've been through more than me, so I don't. That's a very typical response to how we have been molded in our society to make sure that we're making everyone else feel happy while suppressing what's happening inside. So I think the first step is to just acknowledge that
Hmm.
that did feel traumatizing to you, and even if it feels small, and dig into that, but just own the fact that it's okay if it doesn't sound big to other people or even to you. What matters is how it feels to you.
Yeah. And I noticed this too a lot, especially last year when I was going through my cancer diagnosis and everything was happening. And it was the strangest thing because then when I would talk to some of my friends or something, or maybe we'd go for a walk, like people would always feel like they couldn't bring up what was happening in their life because they would be like, oh my gosh, but you're going through all of this. And like, compared to what and I'm like, but don't compare it, like you're still going through, it doesn't matter what I'm going through, like you're still going through something. And finally, I would tell them, like, please talk about what's happening with you because number one, I need to distract myself from what is happening with
Totally.
me. And it makes me feel so much better to know that I can be here listening and helping somebody else. I'm like, because my mess is going to be my mess. Like, we're not going to be able to change this for at least a year plus, right? Like, I'm already going through it. So, sitting here and continuing to rehash it and talk about it is really not doing anything for me. But I really had to like remind people of that so many times last year when people were like, I don't want to bring it up because you're already going through everything you're going through. And I'm like, but I had got to such a good space to where I was like, I am able to deal with what's happening to me, but I'm also able to hold space for you and what's happening to you. And I mean, that is the journey, that is the work because it wasn't always that way. Like there was times that I'm like, I don't even want to hear about what's happening with anybody else because I am so deep in my own shit right now that like I can't even give you the attention or the space that you need, which I think also led me to not really reach out to people because I was like, if someone dumps their trauma on me, like I'm not going to be able to handle this
You won't be
because I wasn't
present.
even handling my own. And I think that maybe some people also are not bringing up what's happening to them because then we also get into this like people pleasing, right? And then there's
100%.
that.
I like what you're saying because this is something I have to keep in mind a lot, and especially in my work, as not viewing other people's minds as working like our own, because I am more of an external processor. And I don't fully understand sometimes that people do like to hold things in. There are a
Yeah.
lot of people who don't want to talk about things because they feel like a burden, right? And so the first step is just acknowledging that we all have different ways of managing it. Sometimes, especially when we're going through things, a friendship is no different than any other type of relationship where communication is so important. So I always recommend in these scenarios, and what I would do during my divorce was ask questions like, what headspace are you in today? And like,
Mhm.
this is kind of where I'm at. I'm in a headspace where I I'm very sad, but I'm not able to be present. If you still want to hang out under those contexts, I would love to see you. Or if not, I will definitely reach out in a couple days, a couple weeks, and get something on the books when I can be more present. Having those conversations. I also think it's funny what you said, because I was talking to a friend last night who was over, and she said, she again, this is owning her authenticity, which I love this about her. She goes, "Well, I just spread it out among my friends because I know I can't just do that every day with all my friends." So she's like, "On Tuesday, I call so and so and talk about it, and then I wait a little bit of time before I talk to her about it again, and I'll talk to so and so." And that's so funny. But it's really just communicating with your friends and your relationships to see like actually how they view it, because for some people, and for me personally, how I bond and how I feel loved is when people do share things with
Yeah.
me. And when they don't, I'm like, I it makes me sad, one, that they don't feel comfortable coming to me, but also like I just that's how I bond. I feel needed, and I also feel like I can just be honored to hold that space for them.
Yeah.
And so you never know. You never know how your friend is feeling. So having those conversations, I think, can be so important.
Yeah, and I really wish I would have known that years ago to actually maybe tell people that so that I could still, have the friendships and have the relationships in my life instead of just like, I can't handle it, so I'm just gonna stay alone and I'm not gonna talk to
Mm,
anybody because, that's what I tell people too all the time is I'm like, if you don't open up, if you don't talk about it, even if you don't feel comfortable talking to somebody else, I'm like, journal it, say it out loud, do something. I'm like, because you need to release it because keeping those emotions stuck in you is what can physically manifest itself and make you sick. Like I'm
yeah.
literally a walking testament of that and I tell people all the time like I don't know exactly why I got sick. I don't know exactly why I got cancer, but I'm pretty sure that holding all my emotions in and not talking about it and just taking on everyone else's burdens probably had a lot to do with it.
Yeah, Gaber Mate talks about this a lot. I'm sure you've
Mhm.
heard of him, or and I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, but the manifestation of holding in these feelings and how it correlates with autoimmune diseases and stress on the body and inflammation is profound. And
Yeah.
so I like to talk to people about this a lot because it's we put so much emphasis and importance on physical illness, but when we talk about mental illness, we brush it to the side. But what about when we really acknowledge the real truth that mental illness is physical illness? It turns into physical illness when it's not addressed. I feel like that's when people start to take it a little bit more seriously, because we do know that being chronically stressed, or even certain diagnoses like bipolar disorder or borderline personality disorder, because of the amount of trauma on their nervous system, it decreases a life expectancy between 7 and 10 years. And that's we know that. And so why we don't talk about that enough, I don't know. But making sure that we express and have these emotions pass through our body, and like you said, write it down, tell a friend, meditate on it, is so crucial for moving forward.
I agree. And I think I know so many women that come into my world, when we start talking about it and talking about being like, a mindset mentor and all of these things, like a lot of women are like, okay, like, well, that's cute, but I don't have time. And I'm like, if I could just emphasize to you, though, how important this is, and this is not like, okay, when my kids go back to school, okay, when my kids graduate high school, like and I try to tell people all the time, like you have to develop this mindset and these tools right now before life gets hard, before the hard things hit,
Mm.
because it's going to help you better be able to deal with whatever is thrown your way. And there's just like a lot of women are just juggling a lot in general. Like you're busy, you got kids, you got work, relationships, life, whatever, and Like, how do you, when women feel like life is not slowing down enough for me to heal right now, so I'm just going to keep continuing the way that I've been going for all of these years because I'm okay, even though
Mm.
internally you're not and you're a wreck. And I think that a lot of them don't even realize what the possibility is on the other side of it, of actually going on a healing journey and starting to do this. Like, what do you tell the woman that's like, she just feels like it's impossible to fit it in, that she just doesn't have the time for this?
I mean, self-abandonment. I mean, that's the first thing that comes up, right? And
Hmm.
it's just playing into that greater picture of like abandoning ourselves to make sure that we hold everything together on the outside. But the truth is, the growth and the change starts when you start loving yourself and taking care of yourself. We, throughout the day, are constantly sending subconscious messages to our brain about whether or not we are safe for ourselves. We always talk about if someone else is safe, if we feel comfortable around someone else. But if you're not providing a comfortable, safe environment for you, how could you ever expect anybody else to provide that for you?
Hmm.
If your son or your daughter were sick and not, you would take them to the doctor. So why are you not doing that with yourself? So I would just encourage people who are maybe struggling with that thought of taking it seriously to just think on that a little bit more and like the relationship that they have with themselves, because to me it all kind of goes back to that. And look, I mean, I went to the hospital, I got an MRI, they thought I had MS, they thought I had multiple sclerosis. I was getting MRIs. I've spent so much money in MRIs because I was so stressed in my marriage, and I didn't, like, the doctors looked at me like I was crazy. And I will say, like, during that time, I could not accept that my mental health and my environment and my marriage was the reason for my illness. I couldn't. I was like,
Hmm.
no, I'm sick. Like, and the doctors were telling me, they were asking me questions. And this is when I started really getting spidey senses that I should focus on it. They were like, well, what is your home life like? And I was like, okay, I see where this is going. A little bit of defensiveness comes up at first just because of everything I know about the medical industry and how women, most of their physical illnesses are passed off as mental.
Hmm.
But it was in that moment that I was kind of like, okay, look, like this is killing you. And it's taken a year off of my life where I couldn't work out. I couldn't hang out with friends. I almost lost my job during that time when I was working full time because the brain fog was so bad. The inflammation was so bad. Neurologically, I couldn't see straight. Like my vision was going. And so, unfortunately, I do think it takes some people to hit that point before they really
Yeah.
take it seriously. But again, it's not our fault. We've been conditioned as a society to not take that seriously. So it's really, I think, just about like educating ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. And you have a free assessment, right?
Mhm.
Called Is It Anxiety or Intuition?
Yes.
And I think that question alone is like going to make women go, okay, wait, hold on.
Yep.
But explain that assessment a little bit. And like, how do we start to tell the difference between the two?
Yeah, totally. So it's called anxiety versus red flag, or, you could sub that out for different things. But so really, the reason why I created that is because I struggled with this myself many years ago, but I also see it so much, and in particular for women as well. If you've had any sort of trauma, it is so hard to know if what you're experiencing is coming from your trauma or if it's coming from something that's actually happening in your life. Because one, we explain everything away as women. We're rationalizing everything. We're self gaslighting ourselves to believe that, no, it couldn't possibly be true. So there's that. But also, it really does go much deeper because we have lost touch with ourselves to such a profound degree that it's actually kind of impossible to touch in with our intuition if our nervous system is not regulated. And so the first step is always making sure that you're regulated and you're viewing things from that space. Whenever you're viewing it from that place of panic, even just getting to the place of being like, is it my anxiety? Is it intuition? You're already in the wrong spot, because that's not when you are regulated and when you're calm and when you're clear, that's not happening. So, how we work through that, and this is kind of what this guide goes through, dialectical behavioral therapy focuses on this a lot. It focuses on helping us understand through one, radical acceptance, but also like tangible tools on how to physically write out and separate what is an assumption that we're making in our head, what is an actual fact, what is coming from past experiences, and what is coming from what's happening right now. And so really dialectical behavioral therapy, as I mentioned, just goes through and helps us see things a lot more clearly to understand not only what we're thinking and feeling and what's important to us, but also how to express it if we need to. So one thing I hear a lot in relationships with women, they're spiraling and they don't know if they should bring something up. They're like, do I bring this
Right.
up? I don't want to be too much. I don't want to be too much. So DBT actually has evidence that shows some of the skills that they teach people to use. You are more likely to get your needs met when you request it or express your need in this manner. So DBT will go through exactly how to do that in a studied manner that makes it to where you're more likely to get your needs met. Because one of the biggest fears, right, is, well, if I set this boundary, what's going to happen? Well, guess what? We don't know. That's what's so scary about setting a boundary and speaking up.
Mhm.
But if you have the tools, which is all you can do, and you know that statistically speaking, if you do express it in this manner and communicate it in this manner, you're more likely to get your needs met. People are more likely to try it and start speaking up and being authentic, and then really being able to determine whether or not something is a red flag or it's anxiety. Because from my personal opinion, what determines whether or not something is anxiety or a particular red flag in a relationship is how the conversation goes. Can you have this communication with them? It's not that initial thought or feeling, it's the observation and patterns over time and communication.
That's good. Yes. Feel like a lot of people listening are gonna have to take that assessment, right?
I ho- yeah, and I hope it's helpful.
And so a lot of young women, like you've worked with teenage girls, right, that are going through some really hard things. And I talk a lot about, like I said, like my daughter's developing these tools now before they have to relearn everything like when they're 40. But maybe what did that teach you about helping young women that maybe was something that you never got in your life? Like, how
Yeah.
can I better support them? Like, almost like I try to do with my daughters and you try to do with the people that you work with is like, how can I better support them so that they don't have, I don't want to say issues, but you know what
Mhm.
I'm saying? So that they don't have the same maybe patterns and things creep up that they have to relearn like we did.
Yeah. So I don't work directly with adolescents now, but I have in the past. And just from what I know in the field, I'm happy to give my input on that because I think it's really important. And also, I want to point out, I'm just really happy that you're thinking about that because our generation or my generation of parents, that's not the thought process. The process was let them cry it out. And that was very, very different. So this new generation of parents coming through who are actually asking these questions, that's the first step. And to me, that's beautiful. And as a teen who really struggled and had developed a lot of trauma, one thing that I definitely recommend is just having the conversations and being curious. So oftentimes teens are afraid to speak up about how they feel because they don't want to disappoint their parents, especially if they have a good relationship with their parents. So I really think that common communication strategies that you would use in your marriage or your own relationship translate beautifully to working with teens as well. They're still just people, And so
Yeah.
coming from the lens of curiosity and just asking the questions like, how are you feeling about this? Hey, I noticed this the other day. Am I picking up on that right? Or is there something else that you'd like to share with me? I just want to understand. Like I want to get to know you better. That builds a sense of trust, but also a sense of autonomy in the teen of like they're allowed to have their own identity and you're curious what that looks like separate from what your own perception is.
Yeah.
Number 2, the biggest thing for me, I would say is apologizing when making mistakes. I think yeah, and it's hard to do, but I have seen the damage that does firsthand and also with teens that I've worked with because that is what trains teens and people at a younger age to question their own reality and whether or not their feelings are valid even though they always are. And so I think just owning it is really, really healthy. And it also teaches them when they get older and they get in relationships that they can apologize. And then they
Yeah.
also have higher standards for being with a partner who's like, I'm sorry. They're not going to tolerate someone who just constantly berates them and then doesn't take accountability because they were raised with someone who was like, yeah, I was kind of an ass this morning. Sorry, kid, I love you and I'm going to work on that. Like, I'm going to
Yeah.
try my best not to do that. That's what builds a relationship and confidence in a child.
100%. And it's ironic that you bring that up too because there was not a lot of apologizing in my childhood and growing up. And so I think it also kind of makes you put maybe your parents or people like adults in your life on like a pedestal almost because you're like, shoot, like they never messed up. They never said they were sorry, like they're perfect. And I tell my daughters all the time, I'm like, this is my first time being a mom and there was no book and there was no manual. And I'm going to tell you guys, like, I tell them when I mess up and sometimes it is the next day when I'm like, oh man, I really was like feeling kind of a little bit irritated yesterday and I'm really sorry because I was being short with you guys and I didn't
Mhm.
mean to be, but I think it also like humanizes, me a
Yes.
little bit and they're like, okay, like mom's not perfect. She doesn't have it all figured out. Okay, cool. Like it also lets gives them the belief that like I don't have to know everything either. Like we're going to learn as
Mhm.
we go. And I tell them all the time and another thing that I learned especially with my oldest because my youngest and I are similar personalities and my oldest is very very strong-willed. She's so when she gets in the car and like something has happened, I've learned with her now is like, "Do you want to talk about it?" And she's like, "Nope." And then she'll come to me maybe like 2 hours later and be like, "Okay, can we talk now?" Whereas before, I would just push and push and push and be like, "We need to talk about it. We need to talk about it." It's like, first of all, this girl just walked out of school. Like, she is not ready to sit here and have a conversation. But now I've learned to give her the space, and then she comes to me when she's ready instead of like making everything on my terms.
Mm. Well, again, that's building trust and that's beautiful. And you made me think of another point. There's something that we talk about in psychology about being the good enough parent. Being a perfect parent actually can be harmful when you're trying to be a perfect parent all the time. What makes a good enough parent is someone is having that relationship and the ability to have rupture and repair. So again, it's not about the ruptures, it's about repairing. And this translates into romantic relationships later in adulthood as well. Therapists, we are concerned, and again, I'm not a therapist, I'm a soon to be therapist, but we are more concerned with if there's no conflict, that's more concerning. Having conflict and being able to repair after rupture is what matters. This translates into work relationships, parent child relationships, romantic relationships. And if there's anything that I could just like scream from a mountaintop is like, it's okay to fight. It's okay to have healthy conflict as long as you repair it afterwards. And so that is what creates that stability. And that's also what we talk about in secure attachment. We can observe secure attachment in a baby. We can tell whether or not they're developing a secure or insecure attachment style. And what they found is that the secure attachment styles are built off of the baby feeling comfortable to go off, do what they want to do, and come back, to be able to have moments where they're scared and they're like, where's my mom? She abandoned me. And then she comes back. So being able to have that repair is crucial. Like
Mhm.
nobody's perfect. And learning your daughter in that way and being like, I get it. That to me is like the most profound form of love that you can give your child is saying, I'm willing to learn what works for you as well
Yeah.
because you're worth it.
And I think you touched on something else really interesting that for me in my marriage, we did not fight, but we also didn't communicate very well and we didn't talk about things. And in my mind, because I grew up, watching my parents argue, I'm like, well, we're not fighting though. So, like, that's good because
Mm,
I'm not them, but then realizing in the end when I would have like the courage to finally say something or finally bring something up, like we couldn't repair it. It would just get completely blown out of proportion. So for me in my head was like, oh, well, if I don't say anything, then I'm keeping the peace and we're not fighting. And like as long as we're getting along, everything's okay. And it was not okay. Like by any means. And I've learned so much, like obviously from that experience, but now also really trying, like you said, to touch on it is like for my daughters, like, what do you need? Not what do I need? And especially when you're raising them and you're like responsible for humans, like I feel like there's
absolutely.
so many like formative things that are happening, especially in the years that they are right now, that I'm like, not that if I don't get this right, but in the sense if I don't try my hardest to help them, this could have like potential effects on them for the rest of their life. And I just feel this overwhelming responsibility that sometimes it's a lot. But
Mm,
my best friend and I, we talk about it all the time. She goes, we're going to mess our kids up. It's going to happen. It's regardless. They
mhm.
might end up in therapy because of what we do or what we don't do. And like, we just have to be okay with that.
Again, just being the good enough parent.
Right.
That's all you need to do is be good enough. You don't have to be perfect. You just got to be good enough. And we're all I do not currently have children, but nobody comes out unscathed. I
Right.
mean, it's just
Exactly. No matter
we're
what.
we're doing our best.
We're just doing our best, guys. And as long as you do your best, then that's all you can say at the end of the day is like, you know what? I
Yeah.
really tried. I really,
Yeah.
really tried.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say, just coming from the upbringing that I did, and what was really helpful too is just knowing that someone cares enough about my perception and trusts my reality and my perception of what I'm saying is really important. So that, I think, just again ties into that whole, like, having the curiosity in the discussions of being like, I'm just so curious. Like, what happened for you? I noticed you were like kind of in a bad mood this morning. We don't have to talk about it, but I am like super curious. I want to understand you a little bit more. Do you want to talk about it? Just it gives them that, like, oh, I do matter, but I'm also not forced. They
Yeah.
care about my boundaries. So yeah, I think that's beautiful. And I think the way that you are putting in this effort, and like how it sounds like how much you care about this is really beautiful.
Yeah, and that's why I always say, like, if there's somebody that I can have on the show that I'm interested in, I feel like my audience and my listeners will be interested as well. And
100%.
as much as I can learn, you know what I mean? It's like amazing. You get to spend 45 minutes with somebody and learn all about their work and what they do, but it also helps me so much because then I can translate things into my own life with what I'm doing, like with myself, with my daughters, with everything else. And that's why, I always try to bring people on, like, to actually to teach the audience, so that hopefully the listeners go away from this episode with like, oh, you know what, that kind of shifted the way that I was thinking about something. Like that really helped me to learn something. And that's my whole goal at the end of the day, because I know that people's time is precious. And if you chose to spend 45 minutes with Kaytlyn and myself, I really, really hope that you take something out of the episode.
Yes.
So for the people that are listening that they want to connect with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, so they can connect with me on my Instagram, which is not so dumb blonde underscore pod, or YouTube at therapy K. And I just really go over, I post things from my own podcast, my own weekly interviews with mental health professionals, but I also post things that I'm learning throughout my social work journey and becoming a therapist, and different dialectical behavioral therapy tools for healing and in relationships and trauma healing.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming today and
Yeah, thank
sharing your
you.
expertise with us. I know I learned a lot. Hopefully, the listeners learned a lot. And if you guys did, we would love it if you guys would share this episode, if you would tag us so we could personally thank you for listening, because you don't always know who's on the other side of the downloads. And it's nice to, be able to thank somebody for spending time with us.
100%. And I will say, just before we hop off, if anybody is struggling with spiraling and not knowing the difference between what they're experiencing, if it's intuition or if it's their trauma or anxiety or a red flag, and in particular in relationships, don't hesitate. I'll send the link to Sarah to download my free Is It Anxiety or a Red Flag guide.
Yeah, for sure. We'll put all that in the show notes so you'll be able to find Kaytlyn's Instagram, her YouTube, the guide. And I just hope that you guys go out and create some sunshine in your lives today.
Yes, thank you.